Hey,
Hello,
Bill.
Matt.
Hey, Bill.
How you doing, sir?
Let's do what the other shows do. My name is Matt Lewis, and I'm a senior contributor at the Daily Caller.
My name is Bill Scher, online campaign manager at Campaign for America's Future, and also proprietor of LiberalOasis.com, home of the Liberal Oasis Radio Show podcast.
If we're like the other shows, we should also hold up our phones, because God knows you must be holding some sort of a receiver.
And in case you don't know, you're in the DMZ.
This is the DMZ. We've been criticized for talking about how it is warm and moist in the DMZ.
It's a beautiful day in northern DMZ right now.
Before we get going, Bill, you've got something to plug. What?
That's right.
We're going to have a rendezvous.
My posse at Campaign for America's Future, we have our annual conference. Its current incarnation is called Take Back the American Dream, 3-day conference in Washington, D.C. Paul Krugman, Van Jones, Bernie Sanders, Sherrod Brown, Katrina Vanden Heuvel, Chris Hayes, Melissa Harris Perry, all sorts of folks are going to be there. Big progressive confab, and I think after Wisconsin, after Netroots Nation, there is still a sense of where do we go from here? How do we function in a Citizens United landscape? And so there's going to be a lot of discussion and planning how progressives should be involved in the political process from here to election day. So if you want to be on the front lines, if you're like Matt Lewis and you want to be a fly on the wall, a good place to be, Washington Hilton, Washington, D.C., Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday next week.
And there's hopes that we will have a DMZ up, you and me.
That's right.
Or a DMZ-ing, I'm not sure. But
I haven't been down to Southern DMZ in a long time.
The Southern DMZ, you can tour the borders here.
I hear the barbecue's better.
So we've got a lot to talk about, but I want to open up with a little bit of a complaint about something that was bothering me yesterday, and that is salad bar etiquette. I go to this place called Lawson's
I understand
Deli.
Southern DMZ has lots of salad bars.
We eat well here, and we eat healthy. And I go to a place called Lawson's Deli here. There's actually 2 Lawson's Delis within a stone's throw of each other. But I go to the one by the Washington Post. And first of all, I think it's clear that there's a beginning and an end to a salad bar. Like, this is one, you go around and hit both sides. But clearly, to me, the salad bar ends where the dressing is. And what I do is I start at the beginning, and I'm very quick. I don't take time, like, just, ever so, gently getting the exact right amount of red beets. I go through very quick, and I start at the beginning and I end. And I've been having this problem lately where people start at the end and they're, coming the wrong way, or they're jumping in, God forbid, the middle of the salad bar. And I can't help thinking, Bill, that this is something about the collapse of Western civilization. And I just wonder if you've experienced this same god-awful dilemma.
It sounds like the beginning of a great David Brooks column.
I think you could be right. And by the way, I read that David Brooks column, and it made me feel better because I thought I had a writing problem, but I now realize that I have a follower problem. My problem is really the people.
If people could just follow authority on the salad bar line, you would be eating in a much more efficient, expeditious way.
Well, David Brooks wrote this column the other day, and he used our monuments, our national monuments, Lincoln Memorial, etc., as a jumping off point to talk about something really, Bill, that we've talked about a lot lately is how our institutions are crumbling and we don't have leaders like we used to, and that's good and bad maybe. I would have used a salad bar analogy as a jumping off point. He used monuments. But Bill, this is I thought it was an interesting column, but it has elicited some intense pushback. And I have to say, Bradley Balco at The Agitator, he is the agitator.com, and wrote what I think may be the quintessential David Brooks takedown. This guy has been beat up so much. I mean, why don't you, in your words, Bill? I guess before we talk about that, how would you even explain this column if you were to explain it to someone who hadn't read it yet?
How would I explain it?
Yeah.
I mean, to get to the heart of it, I think he goes in sort of some very odd detour talking about the underlining subtext of the Eisenhower Memorial and the Roosevelt Memorial and all this Korean War Memorial
MLK.
stuff. But the bottom line of his piece is that he feels that that society has become too skeptical and outright hostile towards any sort of authority, and that, to quote him, you ended with movements like Occupy Wall Street and the Tea Parties that try to dispense with authority altogether. They reject hierarchies and leaders because they don't believe in the concepts. The world should be like the internet, a dispersed semi-anarchy in which authority is suspect and each individual is king. And he ends by saying that you can't have good leaders unless you also have good followers able to recognize just authority, admire it, be grateful for it, and emulate it.
A couple of things. I think part of it is that people assume, and by the way, as I mentioned, you and I, this is something that I believe in. I mean, that it used to be that it was easier to have leaders, and now it's harder for someone to be accepted as a leader, and I think there are good and bad things. But the problem with David Brooks is, I think people got the sense that this was self-serving, that because he is a member of the old media, and he had a newspaper column, and now all of a sudden you have these bloggers out there who can criticize him and who are these barbarians at the gate, that he is unhappy about that. In other words, he wanted to sort of pull the ladder up after him. And I think that was what some of the criticism, because this thing has evoked a lot of criticism. What's your take?
I mean, I honestly don't understand what his motivation is for writing the piece, because he certainly doesn't. He's not much of a genuflector, I feel, in his column writing. He's plenty of critical. He's not as critical towards Obama as some other conservatives. Obviously, there's the famous Politico, Brooksometer to gauge, where centrist opinion is swaying, as if Brooks is the ultimate arbiter of that. But he certainly is plenty critical of Obama when he feels it's justified. And so I don't quite get what Brooks is, what his underlying motivation is. Having said that, I actually agree with David Brooks on this point. At least to a point. I don't agree with every last word of the column. I think the whole monument thing is ridiculous. I don't think you have to completely besmirch having movements like Occupy and the Tea Party. I don't think it's necessarily a new development in history. There's a bit of a get off my lawn, old man element to that kind of criticism that I don't think is historically accurate. There's always been movements like that in American history. But as I said, and when we talked about, where would we be ideologically if we were lived in a different time and era, I said I have a bias towards, people who are in the mix and doing things as opposed to people on the sidelines throwing rocks. So I have a sympathy to what Brooks is saying, that, if you have someone who has been charged by the people, we're not living in a monarchy here, you've been elected by the people to solve problems. I think folks should be given a little bit of elbow room and try to solve those problems, and you can render judgment after they get a crack at it. And there is a tendency, I think, in the new media and the old media to just constantly deride a policy before it's barely been implemented and given a chance to work, and find every single possible way to nitpick it to death. And that's a hard way to govern. But where I would probably diverge with Brooks is that I don't think this is necessarily all that new a development in history. Just perhaps it's a little more magnified because of the speed of the blogosphere. But I don't think it's a strain of American politics that is wholly new.
Well, I think you're right, though, about technology. I mean, Chris Hayes has a book out about elites, so this is topical, and I think it's going to remain topical for a while. But speaking of technology, and I mean, is it possible for any president, for example, to be popular the way that, say, FDR was? I mean, I don't think so. I think that even if there were some sort of national crisis that unified people, it would be incredibly temporary because not just of the political environment, but because of the technological ability for people and the incentive structure. So you have, in the old days, you might have had a few, I mean, where to start with this? Think of like a newspaper editor. There are certainly things today that blogs, and I'm not talking about, bloggers in pajamas in basements. I'm talking about, news outlets that have new media writers and bloggers cover that in the old days you would have gone to your editor and he would have been like, "Kid, this is bullshit. We're not putting a picture of Rick Santorum topless sunbathing on our paper. That's not news." So some old guy somewhere would have like bawled you out and told you, "No, we're not going to run that." Now, maybe that's good and maybe that's bad. That same old guy might have said, "No, we're not going to write about Monica Lewinsky." And maybe that's good and maybe that's bad. Not everything about the good old days was good. They covered up a lot of stuff that probably shouldn't have been covered up. But there were elites, there were bosses, there were leaders who had the juice to make decisions. And nowadays, that's really impossible. And, I mean, David Brooks blames this phenomenon. And by the way, he essentially, we didn't really explain the monument paradigm, but he basically argues, we've got these beautiful monuments like the Washington Monument, the Lincoln Memorial, that are awesome. And then we've got these modern monuments like the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial, which is hideous. And I think the men certainly deserve better than this monument that we've created for him. And I think he's trying to argue that the reason our modern monuments suck is that we don't respect leaders and authority. And I think that's a dubious assertion. It very well may be that our taste and aesthetics has just declined. But that's his jumping off point. But be that as it may, he blames us. David Brooks blames the public, saying that we've become cynical and that we've become selfish. And I think that a lot of the reason for that is not that we're cynical and selfish. It's that we have Twitter and blogs now, and that the technology has changed the world.
Well, I think it's always hard to explain, not on every issue, of course, but there are certain issues that can be hard to convey why something is a good idea. The basic concept of Keynesianism, for example, that it makes sense to go into debt for a period of time. It doesn't make sense on its face. It takes some time to explain it. And I find this is true at all levels of government. I see it for local issues, why a certain development might make sense, even though it's encroaching on a certain part of land, or it's taking away a certain bit of open space to the public, that it might, because it'll expand your tax base and maybe make it easier on your school budget. Those sorts of things. There's always a knee-jerk reaction. I think that's human nature to say, what you're doing sounds suspicious to me, and perhaps this is a technological thing, that it's quicker to convey that skepticism and get and air that backlash than it was before, and that's why we try to have elections that are spaced out to give ideas a chance to work. And to try to show the public, hey, maybe you didn't quite get where I was going at first, but now you've seen it in action, and now you have a chance to render the judgment whether it was a good idea or a bad idea. I would like to see the media give more weight to explaining what's going on, not trying to find the way to jump on everything. That doesn't mean you whitewash debate or you act like scribes to the power elite. But I do think there is way too much bias the other way, saying let's find the soft underbelly here and play that up, as opposed to giving a balanced depiction of what the pros and cons of various ideas.
I mean, we used to have gatekeepers, and there's a downside to gatekeepers. Gatekeepers can be corrupt. Gatekeepers can be bought off. Gatekeepers can be out of touch. We had elites, and it's sort of like a representative, democracy where we had sort of trusted and assigned these opinion leaders, these elites to. And the thing was, because they had this role, you could talk to them. So a president could presumably talk to Bill Buckley and persuade him of something, and Buckley was sort of like the de facto leader of the conservative movement, and because he had this cachet and the money to start a magazine and run a magazine and whatever, he could do things like write off the Birchers and do things which were very, I would say, brave and courageous. And yes, some people canceled their subscriptions to National Review, but that was okay. I think that we have less courage today and less acts of bravery because leaders don't have that ability. They're not comfortable in their leadership role because they're leaders only so long as the followers decide. And again, a lot of good things about that. I mean, David Brooks, if it weren't for the blogosphere, David Brooks would probably have a better life. And I would have him, and you would have no idea who I am, and I wouldn't. So,
I think it's generally a healthy thing that technology has broken down a lot of barriers, can connect people closer to their governments, to give everybody a chance to have their opinions have an impact on society. I think that is generally for the good, but I do think it's bad if you lose. All of the gatekeepers. I mean, that's this phrase for it, but let's be a little realistic here. It is impossible for your average citizen, and I put myself in this camp, to do everything. You can't run your personal life. You can't do your job. You can't raise your family, and fully control all of government and all of the media at the same time. It's just not possible. There's going to be some divisions of labor. Some people are going to spend more time focused on government issues or focusing on analyzing policy and think tanks or media purchase or what have you. And we pay for newspapers and magazines, and we pay for cable television, and we pay for government to say, hey, you do this job for me. I will supervise you. I will keep some tabs, and I will hire and fire folks. I will stop subscribing to this newspaper if it's not doing a good job. I will fire this politician if they're doing a bad job. I understand that you're spending more of your time in this than I am, and I'm going to have to defer to your judgment to some degree. Maybe I'll check with multiple people, so I'm not just completely fled by the nose by one person. But someone should have the job of saying, you know what, this news is actually relevant to your life. This news is going to impact your household budget or the education for your kids or the air that you breathe. And the person that this congressman is diddling isn't going to do that. So I'm not going to put that on page one. This is actually relevant to you. Take my word.
There is this thing, the best and brightest got us into Vietnam, and Bill Buckley's thing about I'd rather be governed by the first 500 names in the Boston phone book than the Harvard faculty. I mean, there is a lot of truth to that, and there are a lot of elites who don't know what they're doing and who have gotten us in a lot of trouble. By the same token, I don't tell if someone is a heart surgeon It doesn't mean I don't get if he tells me something, if my cardiologist tells me something, it doesn't mean I don't get a second opinion. But I'm not going to tell the guy how to do open heart surgery. I don't know as much about open heart surgery as he does because he went to college for God knows how many years to do it. But I think we have a mentality now that's like, I'm just as good as that guy. What does he know? He's a doctor? I Googled it. I mean,
the big cop out here is the tabloid journalist who says, well, I'm just giving this to the people, and the people can decide what they want or what they don't want. I'm freeing this information. I'm giving it to the world. But let's face it, these media institutions make a choice what to put their resources into. It's not like they take all of the news out there. Here's all the boring stuff, and here's all the half-naked stuff, and it's all on the same platform in the same place, and you get to pick and choose. They push certain things. They don't necessarily push the new GAO study on you. They push the tabloid stuff, and that's the way they're exercising their gatekeeper duty because they're afraid. And then more so than in the past, they're afraid because of the internet and because of those platforms, someone else is going to get to that story before you, and they're going to get the clicks and not you. So you might as well do it first.
Yeah. And as I mentioned, Brooks's column sparked an incredible backlash on Twitter and on blogs, and there were memes popping up mocking him. Radley Balco, who is a libertarian, who takes a much more individualistic approach at things than the communitarian Brooks. I would recommend reading his piece. It was incredibly harsh, but also thought-provoking. But this is also part of another thing that I see happening, which is sort of what's the word I would look for? Bloggers are a little bit sensitive right now. And we saw this play out recently on Hannity, Fox News' Hannity, where Michelle Malkin was in a debate with Juan Williams. And it had to do with Eric Holder, something pretty substantive. But Juan Williams made the mistake of saying something to the effect of, I'm a reporter, I'm not just some blogger. And Malkin took great umbrage to this, and really, I would say, got up on her high horse and really pushed back harshly, and she's now become the heroine to a lot of bloggers who feel very slighted and like they're not taken seriously. And I wrote about this. There's a little pushback because I noted that just as Juan Williams was sort of was critical of bloggers, I mean others, including Sarah Palin in the past I've written about, has been very critical of bloggers. And I think there are good bloggers and bad bloggers, and there are credible bloggers and uncredible bloggers, and there are conservative bloggers and liberal bloggers. But Palin, sort of like Williams, just blanketly mocked bloggers. And I would say, using the word in sort of a pejorative fashion. So I felt Malkin was kind of pandering a little bit, trying to win over conservative bloggers who feel. I mean, granted, she's on Fox. She's also a columnist and an author, but she's also a blogger of the people. So, you know her, and you're a blogger, and wanted to get your take on this. And also, how does it fit into the larger discussion we're having about elites? And I do feel that a lot of bloggers resent. It's not just the mainstream liberal media, but it's people like Brooks who see themselves as, maybe a little bit better, a little bit smarter, a little bit more equipped than.
This is where if you're going to make the case that somehow, by nature of your position, you should get deference, you have to earn that. You don't get to decree it. I
think bloggers take this counterintuitive role that says you shouldn't pay attention to us because we went to an elite school or because we were a speechwriter in the Bush administration or whatever. It's the opposite. It's because we are keeping it real, and the reporters and journalists, they're not getting it done. They're lazy or whatever, or they're in the tank for somebody. But it's the bloggers, and I feel like bloggers have been elevated, sort of like, how all police are heroes now and all firefighters. I think that it's like, I feel like at some point some presidential candidate is going to have to be like, and the real people out there who make this country work, the firefighters, the police officers, the bloggers, holding us all accountable. I mean, that's
both broad brush arguments are ridiculous. It's silly for Juan Williams to try to dismiss an argument by saying you're just a blogger, because that doesn't say anything. Against some bloggers do credible reporting, and some bloggers are just popping off. And they deride Michelle is just a blogger is factually wrong, because she's not just a blogger; she's a columnist and an author. And the notion that Juan Williams is a reporter, I don't know who's reporting for anymore. He got fired from NPR. He's not reporting for Fox News. He's a pundit on Fox News. He's not reporting. So he has an opinion. Michelle has an opinion. Debate the opinion. Don't try to trump by arguing your occupation so it makes you inherently more right. That's a silly way to go about it. And by this, from the flip side,
and as you know, Bill, I mean, this kind of goes without saying, but nobody says that. This is always implied.
Right.
It's implied by the journalists that they're better because they're real journalists, and it's implied by the bloggers that they're better because they're not paid journalists.
Again, I'm as I just said, I'm all for deferring. I mean, this is where I agree with Brooks. Brooks said to respect just authority. Not any authority, not to be a total lemming, not to have any kind of critical debate or pushback or protest or whatever. But if someone's earned it by the quality of their work, or in the case of politics, by earning a vote from the people, then you give that guy a little bit of slack, perhaps.
And I think you made a very important distinction there, which is just authority.
Right.
And it reminds me of ordered liberty. It's very important to have those qualifiers in there. And I think that so many people who are outraged about Brooks kind of conveniently forget the just part of it.
I mean, this is where I find a lot of this is the downside of the blogosphere. And I find this a lot whenever I post on Huffington Post, for example, where a place where there's more commenting. You read 90% of your comments. It's very clear they didn't even read your actual piece. It's one thing to criticize what you actually wrote, but typically they've read your headline or maybe a couple sentences and then just imposed upon you their view of the caricature of your ideology, in my case, the caricature of a liberal, and then just shoved a lot of words in my mouth. And I'm sure you've probably seen this, in your comment threads too. If someone's going to take the time to write an entire piece, read the whole thing. Qualifiers.
It's usually just the headline. Well, okay. So, interestingly, this nicely dovetails another topic that I've been writing about, which is the use of drones, and also, separate issue, Syria. And I think it dovetails because although I agree with you about representative democracy and that we need leaders who lead and make decisions, that we the people elect them if they're politicians, or we somehow empower them as opinion leaders. But I see happening in the case of drones, I'll use that for an example. It very well may be, and by the way, Connor Friedersdorf, who's a blogging head, and Andrew Sullivan have engaged in a fascinating back and forth. Sullivan defending President Obama's decision to have a kill list and to use drones to kill al-Qaeda members. And Connor Friedersdorf bringing up some very troubling or questionable things about this. And if you're a Blogging Heads fan, Bob Wright and Connor Friedersdorf had a dialogue recently on this topic. So I don't want to go too much into the weeds on it because they have already. But my point is simply that there has been no national conversation about this. Like, I feel like it has been decided that the president can, without approval of anybody, congressional approval or whatever, can use robots to target and assassinate, kill terrorists, hopefully, although some civilians will be collateral damage. And I think it's entirely possible that this is good and appropriate. Like, I'm not reflexively against this. I think it probably is good. But no one asked me about it. And not only, I know that we're not like a true democracy, so I don't expect to vote on everything, but I don't think this has been a big issue in any elections that I've voted on. I guess it was part of the Patriot Act. But anyway, long story short, this is an example, I think, of where, and I'll use Syria as another example. If we get involved there to a larger capacity than we are now, I don't think most of us have really had this national conversation about it. So, anyway, that's my concern.
I half agree with where you're coming from. I'm not opposed to having a national conversation. I agree we haven't had
we haven't even had a DMZ conversation, let alone a national conversation.
We had a little bit of one the other day.
Well, a little bit.
But I don't think that the degree of conversation about drones is. I think we've had more conversation about drones than all sorts of things the CIA was involved with over the period of 1940 into 2010. It's all sorts of stuff that's going down. We weren't debating J. Edgar Hoover's FBI tactics in real time back then either. So the fact that the White House has talked about this to some extent at all publicly is I think is actually somewhat novel. That's kind of as public as it has. Now I think if you want to have a deeper discussion about it, the two parties have to disagree. I mean, most debate is driven by party leadership, and this is what some people get frustrated by. But if the Republican Party wanted to have a big debate with Barack Obama about this, they would have nominated Ron Paul. We would have had one. Mitt Romney doesn't seem all that interested in debating whether drones are good or bad.
Hey, Bill, I voted for Ron Paul.
Is that right?
Oh, haven't we talked about this?
I don't think we did.
I definitely blogged about it. In Virginia,
you're in Virginia, you had no choice.
In Virginia, there was a binary choice between Mitt Romney and Ron Paul.
Now, maybe Gary Johnson as the Libertarian Party nominee is going to, if there is this pent-up desire, in the populace to talk about this, then Gary Johnson's got an in because he'd be the only guy to talk about it. I suspect that most Americans don't want to talk about it because they might have heard about it in a superficial way and it doesn't bother them. They aren't that interested in talking about it in a deeper way. The basic concept of it, a more surgical military option to go after specific terrorists, is not off-putting to most people. And this is something I think that drove the left in particular quite up the wall in the Bush years. And I'm not saying this to say that I think the left was wrong on all these counts, but just speaking pragmatically about the nature of American politics, they were raising all these civil liberties issues in the Bush days, and people didn't care. People were more happy to see terrorists being taken out. Now, right. I would personally argue that Obama's better taking out terrorists than George Bush is, and I support that. But the American people's judgment in 2004 was, you know what, not bothered by this. Soldier on. And this goes back to, look, we've had the Alien Sedition Acts and the Palmer raids and the Japanese concentration camps and the McCarthy era and COINTELPRO and time again, civil libertarians have not been able to get the majority of the public to prioritize their issues, whether they're sympathetic to them or not. It's generally not been something the American people treat as a serious problem in times of perceived threats to national security.
Well, I think you're totally right. Unfortunately, I think although I would probably support, first of all, I think there's an argument that President Obama was so concerned that we might be radicalizing people by our involvement in the Middle East. And if anything could radicalize you, it might be a robotic, unmanned vehicle taking out a member of your family who was an innocent civilian. That might possibly radicalize. But I'm willing to. My guess is that nothing is foolproof. There's always a yin and a yang, and I think that it's probably likely that this is not a bad thing. That President Obama is probably doing the right thing. Here's my concern. It has now opened the door to drones in the United States. And where's the outrage about that?
I mean, Barack Obama took out someone who was not only an American citizen in al-Wiki, he also had Yemeni citizenship, and he was in Yemen. But as a technical matter, he had American citizenship. And there was outrage in certain quarters. But there certainly was not outrage in any kind of mass way. Most people said, good, I'm glad you got that guy. Now, I think if you had American drones, hovering over, American airspace, just taking random shots at people, it might be a different story. But so long.
Right, but there's a thing now. I mean, Governor Bob McDonnell vetoed a bill that would have. I want to make sure I get this right. He vetoed a bill that would have essentially allowed Virginia State Police to hand over suspected terrorists to the feds without due process, where they would be treated presumably as detainees. So I thought it was fine. I'm okay with killing al-Awlaki, even though he's an American citizen, because he was in Yemen, and as far as I'm concerned, he was putting on the uniform of an enemy, and he had, by doing that, had his tantamount to renouncing his citizenship, and it was like joining another military outfit, and he was killed abroad. But now, drones in America and American citizens on American soil, this is like a big deal, and I just don't think that there's enough debate or discussion. And I think you're right.
What's not being proposed? No one's proposing American drones over American soil right now. So
I'm sorry.
Another point of even having the debate.
I didn't hear you, Bill. What was that?
We're not. No one's proposing drones on American soil right now. So.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, they are.
In the American government?
Well, I'm not saying that they're proposing shooting people with them, but there are proposals to have drones in America that would be monitoring
for surveillance.
Yeah.
That is different than using it to shoot people.
People smarter than me, but I just, I think that this is. Here's my point. Shouldn't we have a conversation about this? Shouldn't this be a big deal? That's my point. I think this should be like a big deal. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it even. I'm saying I think it's a big deal, and that it's kind of getting a collective yawn by most people.
I have nothing wrong with having a conversation about it. It's a healthy to have a conversation about people should not be in the dark about what their government does. But I don't have the sense that the Obama administration is unwilling to have that conversation. Because I don't know much about this, domestic surveillance part of it, so I won't speak to that. But again, the White House went to the New York Times saying, here's our kill list. Let's talk about it. They're not hiding the ball here. So if someone wants to criticize it, the onus is on them to seize the megaphone and force the debate. And it would seem to me that the Republican Party is not interested in doing that. They're interested in saying Barack Obama is soft on terrorism and doesn't know what he's doing. So they're not forcing that debate. Again, I think that's if there's a real constituency who wants that debate, this is a huge opening for the Libertarian Party. I'm not sure that many people want to have it.
And by the way, and I think you're right, Bill. I'm looking on my iPhone here. MSNBC.com. Americans overwhelmingly support the use of drones for patrolling U.S. borders, tracking down criminals, and aiding search and rescue missions. But they don't want the unmanned aircraft used to issue speeding tickets, according to a poll. So, anyway, that's where we're at. But you know how these things go.
It's like anything else. If it's about somebody else, you're fine with it. If it might get you, then you got a problem. But let's face it. So, we already do speeding surveillance. We already do check radar by aircraft. It's already done.
So, last thing that I wanted to talk about, I don't know if you have anything else, but last thing I wanted to talk about is something we talked about last week, which is cable TV. As you know, I sort of sounded off the notion that cable TV could be having problems, cable news TV, and that websites could eventually have their own alternative. And a couple of things have happened this week, I think, to make that relevant again. Our good friend Dylan Ratigan will be leaving MSNBC. I used to be a regular on his show. Sorry to see him leaving. John King, who I think is fabulous on CNN, is, I guess, losing his show. And
they're not losing his job. He's still
not losing his job. Just I think he's also like some sort of executive, and he's the chief political guy there or something, and he will continue doing that. But he had an hour-long evening show. Was it State of the Union or something? Was that what it was?
John King USA.
John King USA. Okay.
Right. If I understand correctly, the map is okay. The map is okay.
The DMZ should be getting a cable show, and if any power brokers are watching this, Bill and I are available to fill in. And look, why not try something different? You've been trying this other stuff. Let's go with the DMZ. But the thing, Bill, that makes me think I'm right is apparently Huffington Post is launching some sort of show, and I mean, sadly, they will be using one of John Huntsman's daughters, I believe, which is
you're hoping for a Romney son or McCain daughter, perhaps.
I thought Meghan McCain should have gotten this job, and yet they've somehow given it to one of Huntsman's daughters. I think it's a travesty. Nobody deserved this more than Bristol Palin, and. What's up with the daughters of these politicians, getting reality shows, and what the hell qualifies Meghan McCain to opine about politics?
Well, it's the same mentality it's the same mentality why Hollywood studios just keep churning out mindless sequels or buying up the rights to old TV shows.
It's the brand. It's the brand.
By
the way, I saw Avengers. Yeah, it's the name, instant recognition, and the brand, and all that stuff. But what was your take on this? Again, it's interesting, Bill. We are ahead of we had this conversation a week ago, and just within the past week, this, 3 events have happened. How prescient are we?
Well, I think the John King decision, I think, is more an example. CNN is just a mess. CNN began as an attempt at 24-hour hard news, and Fox News proved that you make more money churning out opinion on the cheap, not by investing in a ton of international news bureaus. And CNN can't find a way to adapt to that competitive environment and maintain the old brand. So they keep trying. They keep feeling their way with various things, and nothing hits. So John King's going back to what he did before, being a correspondent and not being an anchor. But where they go from here, I mean, having this block of Wolf and Aaron Burnett and Pierce Morgan, just doesn't seem to have any kind of cohesion. Well, now on the MSNBC side, I don't quite understand the subtext of the Dylan Ratigan decision. It's a little murky whether it was his decision or the executive's decision. I don't have a sense that his ratings were particularly bad or better than anybody else, in the from where Consumer's time slot was. So I just don't know he always struck me as being perhaps, and you know him and I don't, so maybe I'm speaking out of school, but he seemed to be a bit of a prima donna. I remember from when he jumped from CNBC to MSNBC, there was a sense of he was too good for CNBC, he wasn't getting fitted the proper way, and now his name was going to be in the lights being on MSNBC, so I don't know if he was rubbing too many people the wrong way, so he got forced out, or he really believes, as he said in his statement, that he's sort of gone beyond what he can do on cable TV and needs to be part of some sort of larger movement to get money out of politics, and that's what he's going to start building up right now, which I think is an odd notion because there's a zillion people doing that activism about getting money out of politics, and it's not getting very far. So where he thinks he fits into a fairly saturated marketplace there, and certainly not one that's all that profitable, I gotta say, I don't quite get. Maybe you got a better sense of what his thinking was or what's going on there, but that I'm more befuddled by.
I don't have a sense. My guess is you don't walk away from a cable show named after you, but you never know. People walk away from things all the time, which is surprising. To me, the bigger thing is, is this new that Huffington Post? Do they have show? This is going to be, I take it, like a weekly show. And I mean, to me, this is like maybe the first step toward, like, eventually, couldn't the Huffington Post have prime time? Remember how Fox, not Fox News, but Fox, the network, sort of rolled out? They didn't roll out like everything. They were like, we're going to have like a couple show, like Tracy Ullman and 21 Jump Street and Duet or something.
You know your Fox history, sir.
I know my Fox history.
Now, here's the ultimate test, though.
It's Gary Shandling show.
Were you a fan of Whoops?
Was that about a werewolf?
No, Whoops was the Fox show about nuclear holocaust. Well, the last six survivors of nuclear holocaust trapped under one roof. That was the most underappreciated Fox show.
That did not.
And I can't find it anywhere on YouTube. It doesn't exist on the internet. So I'm very sad to say there's no way to get this show. If anyone out there knows, if you got copies of Whoops in your dusty VHS bin, let me know.
There was also a show called Parker Lewis.
That was a good show.
It came a little bit later, but I really felt like CNN, if they wanted to be fun, it would have teamed me and Kathleen Parker.
The guy who played Parker Lewis was in the Toby Keith video, Beer for My Horses.
Oh, I had no idea.
That's Parker Lewis.
I had no idea. You learn something new every day. So I think that's a good place to stop with Toby Keith and Parker Lewis.
We didn't get to Beans Baxter or Flying Blind, Ben Stiller show.
Beans Baxter. I've not heard that in a long time.
Herman's Head.
The Married with Children was, I think, from the very beginning, too. And obviously that one really worked. That one took off. Herman's Head wasn't the woman who plays Bart Simpson.
You're Lee Smith. She's Lisa Simpson, I think.
Lisa? Oh, is it Lisa Simpson? Okay, because Bart Simpson's a woman
that's
as well. Okay. So these are the things that we know.
That's the kind of quality analysis shows get cable TV if you book the DMZ on your favorite network.
Yeah,
right here.
This is waiting, people. This is waiting for you. This is the conversation that you were missing.
And we'll talk about drones. We'll do both. Always good to talk to you, Matt Lewis. I'll see you in Washington, D.C. next week.
Yes. a DMZ up on Monday, hopefully Monday night. Good talking with you, and I do look forward to catching you very shortly. All right. Until next time, America.
Take care.
Stay classy.